Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this, our fourth staging of the World Council of Churches International Menstrual Health Day webinar. Our focus remains primarily on underscoring the link between menstrual health taboos and access to water and sanitation from a faith-based ecological and economic perspective. Previously, in our other webinars, we covered lots of ground. We featured stigma and shame, the use of menstruation products, and the heights of insults, the issue of privacy and silence, the silence of violence and the violence of silence, breaking the silence, raising the volume, seeking to balance theology with praxis. We looked at problems and solutions, the harm of using alternative products, products that are coming from external sources like cloth and wood that are not necessarily hygienic, the need for menstrual leave in cases of severe dysmenorrhea, stigma and exclusion. We looked at period poverty and the implications, particularly during the COVID era. We also looked at menstrual health management. Today, I have with me my two colleagues, Mr. Dinesh Suna, because men are part of the allyship conversation, and Reverend Alexa Dava, who are our hosts for today's webinar. Welcome, Dinesh. Welcome, Reverend Alexa.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Nicole. We call you Nikki, everyone with love. I join my colleague, Alexa Dava, who is joining from the United States now this morning. And I'm based here in Geneva. I am the coordinator of the YWCA's Ecumenical Water Network and as a team member of the Living Planet of World Council of Churches Diaconia program. Before I speak a little more about it, maybe I give you again the floor, Alexa. Just briefly introduce yourself again.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Alexa Dava, Reverend Alexa Dava, and I am the project officer for human dignity and reproductive health, working with the health and healing team here at the World Council of Churches, and with the Commission on Health and Healing as well.
Thank you. And friends, as my colleague Nikki very briefly mentioned, that this is probably the fourth year that we are observing this International Menstrual Hygiene Day, which always on the 28th of May. And this year is very special because this is the 10th anniversary of observation of this day. And this has been going around since 2014. And at the World Council of Churches, we had to find an entry point, and we wanted to collaborate between various programs, such as the Ecumenical Water Network, which works on water and sanitation. We collaborated with the programs on just community of women and men, and with our partners with the Norwegian Church Aid, which is very strongly working on these issues for a quite long time, and our interfaith partners, PAD, International Partnership of Religion and Sustainable Development. And that's how these four different entities have come together in organizing today's webinar. And friends, we are trying to, therefore, as Nikki mentioned, bring in various aspects, not only about the gender aspect or the stigma and discrimination aspect, but involving men of our society, because we live in a patriarchal society, and a lot to do with this problem is the men, and therefore we have to have men joining in this discourse, and it's not a women's private issues any longer. We also have, now I'll invite Alexa Dava also to say why is this new entry on the sexual reproductive health is important, and it's a Menstrual Hygiene Day even gets more education. It's a matter of education and awareness from this point of view as well. So Alexa, would you like to add a few more points?
Yes, just coming from the reproductive health perspective, The WC's program on reproductive health is to facilitate and realize human dignity in the context of sexual and reproductive health issues. And so menstrual hygiene is obviously related to reproductive health, and like Dinesh said, is a metric of the dignity that we have and bear as God's creation, whether or not we are able to care for ourselves and have access to the facilities that we need in order to take care of ourselves. And so yes, we are very excited. And now I will turn it over to our keynote speaker. So Dinesh, Dinesh.
Thank you, Alexa. And as I'm going to be introducing a keynote speaker soon, but I also wanted to remind you about the few objectives that we had set out. It's been a few years, as I said, we've been doing these webinars. So we continue to raise awareness on this important topic, but very seldom talked about in the faith communities. When did you hear last time about menstrual hygiene from the church pulpit, for example? We are going to break some of those taboos and stigmas surrounding menstruation and promote some good practices, because there are some experts present here with us who would be talking about what they are doing, how they are utilizing their organization or the church or any other faith community to break these taboos and make some advancements. As I mentioned earlier, wash facilities, etc., are equally important, and therefore we continue to bring in the sanitation hygiene into the menstrual hygiene as well. And finally, by 2030, hopefully, that no one is held back because they menstruate, and because menstruation is just a normal fact of life. So with this introductory remark, let me introduce our keynote speaker of today, and who is Reverend Dr. Kenneth Mtata. Dr. Kenneth is the head of WCC's Public Witness and Diaconia program, which encompasses all the programs of the WCC in terms of diaconia. And Reverend Kenneth has also worked prior to joining this leadership role at the WCC, was with the Lutheran World Federation, and he has gone back after a stint of several years here in Geneva to head the Zimbabwean Council of Churches as its General Secretary, and has come back now in this leadership role as the Director of WCC's programs for the past couple of years now. So over to you, Kenneth. Please tell us what you want to share. Also, as a man, you want to challenge the men who are participating here to be engaged in the discourse. Over to you, Kenneth.
Thank you, Dinesh. Thank you, Nikki. And also thank you to Alexa. I think this is an important conversation. I want to welcome those who are participating with us here today to this important conversation. On this day every year, you will be aware that the World Council of Churches joins like-minded organizations to raise awareness on good menstrual hygiene management. Globally, 3.5 billion women and girls have monthly periods, and millions of these women suffer from what has been called by the UN Women period poverty. This means that they cannot afford access to menstrual products, sanitation and hygiene facilities, and education and awareness to manage menstrual health. In some contexts, menstruation is shrouded in secrecy, thereby creating space for stigma and abuse. Combined with inadequate sexual and reproductive health services, menstruation can also become a deadly health hazard. as was observed at the last WCC assembly, girls and women in many poorer countries and rural areas continue to lack access to sanitary supplies for menstruation, affecting their dignity and development. That is why the World Council of Churches uses this day to address both issues related to stigma as well as seeking to find solutions to more practical challenges women face during their monthly period. Let's look just a bit on the stigma, social stigma, and the role of culture and theology. In some cultures, when a girl starts menstruating, the mother would slaughter a fowl or a chicken to mark and celebrate the event. Such rituals mark the stage of bodily development, providing a way of managing this life transition. In so doing, the process normalizes any body discharges. These traditional rites of passages provide opportunities to educate young people by introducing them to the physical changes that are taking place in their bodies. But in so doing, this also enables the developing body to deal with the psychological and the social changes that are associated with adolescence. But in many contexts, stigma is associated with menstruation. And in these situations, menstruation is portrayed as an impure or shameful development, leading to isolation, discrimination against menstruating women and girls. Women and girls are banned from participating in normally daily activities, and they are forced to stay in separate rooms or even excluded from places and activities of worship. So the church and other religious actors are partly guilty of this continued stigmatization, sometimes which is buttressed by bad interpretation of sacred writings. From our own tradition as Christians, we read and sometimes are informed by certain scriptures to continue perpetuating these forms of stigmatization. Prior to and away from the Levitical cleanliness codes that we read in the Old Testament on body fluids, we find that in scriptures, the idea of menstruation was not always problematic as it is presented in the Levitical code. And it's important for us to reread these texts because they have a bearing on Judaism and Christianity, the tradition from which we come. There is evidence that menstruation was an ambivalent condition which required family consideration rather than isolation and stigma. So when we read, for example, in Genesis 31, verse 34 to 35, we hear Rachel's openness about her menstrual condition when she speaks to her father. She does so as a matter of fact. But things change. This view changes when we come to the era of the Levitical code. Here, menstruation is included among the unclean things in society that need to be purged or to be forcibly removed from society. These things include leprosy, some animals and the animal carcasses, human corpses, bones or graves, and people with bodily discharges in general, which could include men with unhealthy discharges, seminal discharges, but particularly women who are on menstruation or other abnormal bleedings, as well as women who have just given birth. So we see that women who were bleeding were stigmatized. And as we come to the New Testament period, we can see that this has become a norm in society. But Jesus seems to withdraw from this kind of understanding and draws from more inclusive traditions in treating women with bleeding. We will remember this story in the Gospels. And in this understanding, we have seen that many interpretations of the stories in the New Testament has benefited a lot from Jesus' radical rereading of the traditions of exclusion to take more inclusive readings that Jesus seemed to be identifying with. It is in this understanding that the poet Rachel Wahlberg has reappropriated the Apostles' Creed, which with her reinterpretation called the Women's Creed. And from this, she makes the following statements. I believe in Jesus, who acted boldly to reject the blood taboo of ancient societies by healing the audacious woman who touched him. I believe in Jesus, who healed a woman on the Sabbath and made her straight because she was a human being. By reinterpreting certain biblical texts in empowering ways, the church can greatly contribute to the removal of stigma associated with menstruation. But the challenge we face is not only about culture or even religion. Some of the challenges that we have to address are practical. In addition to the combating stigma, it is crucial to address these practical challenges that many women and girls face. Access to sexual reproductive health services is often limited, especially in rural and undeserved areas. Underserved areas, sorry. This lack of access can lead to serious health complications, including infections and reproductive health challenges. Furthermore, inadequate access to clean water and sanitation facilities makes it difficult for women and girls to manage their menstrual hygiene effectively. This can result in discomfort, embarrassment, and even absenteeism from school or work. Consider the case of a young girl in a rural village who has to miss school every month during her period because her school lacks proper sanitation facilities. She falls behind in her studies, and her chances of achieving her educational goals diminish. This is a reality for millions of girls worldwide. The United Nations report that 1 in 10 girls misses school during their menstrual cycle in sub-Saharan Africa. This is a staggering statistic that highlights the urgent need for change. Poverty exacerbates these challenges. Many women and girls cannot afford sanitary products, forcing them to use unsafe alternatives like rags, leaves, or even ashes. This not only puts their health at risk, but also perpetuates the cycle of poverty by limiting their ability to participate fully in education and employment opportunities. The cost of sanitary pads remains a significant barrier, with some families having to choose between buying food and buying sanitary pads. So to address these and many other practical challenges of this nature, we must advocate for policies and programs that ensure access to affordable and safe menstrual products, clean water, and adequate and sanitation facilities. This includes, of course, working with governments, NGOs, and community leaders to prioritize menstrual health in public health agendas and development plans. Additionally, we must support initiatives that provide education and menstrual hygiene management and empower women and girls with knowledge and resources they need to take control of their own health services. For instance, we can support local initiatives that produce affordable sanitary products or advocate for policies that make these products tax-free and widely available. We can also work to improve infrastructure, ensuring that girls and public facilities have the necessary resources to support menstrual health. You know, actually, I remember that during at the height of HIV, condoms could be available for free in the toilets. But I haven't yet seen toilets where menstrual hygiene material being available for free. I think with the political will, this is possible. It's not something that is impossible. So as I conclude just these introductory remarks, I want to highlight that Menstrual Health Day is not about women and girls. And that's why maybe I was asked to speak as we open. It is for us all. It is not also just for us to raise awareness in our minds, but it is for us to think how strategically we can take action by addressing both the social stigma and practical challenges associated with menstruation. We can start to create a world in which women and men can manage their periods with dignity and without fear of discrimination. This is not an insignificant issue. It's an issue at the heart of strengthening the role of equal participation of women in society. So I also invite you together as we have received the invitation as we begin. Let's normalize monthly periods by breaking the silence as we are doing now, by challenging harmful beliefs and ensuring that women and girls have access to sanitary pads, clean water, and basics they need to have a comfortable menstrual cycle. Now, I don't speak this simply because this is a program that I am involved in. I have a daughter and I have a wife, and I know the struggles they face, even though they are better resourced than many people because they live in an environment where we can afford. But I say this with conviction because we need to change the policies that continue to undermine the dignity of women. It's possible for us to change these policies if we focus ourselves and we do this together. Let's explore these possible policy changes and let's seek to find these changes. I believe that together it is possible for us to make a big difference. And that's why I look to our conversation today, because I believe that after this we can take concrete measures that can see someone's dignity being improved, not in the future, but today, now, in our time. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. Kenneth, also for embedding these discourses in the religion, which somewhat becomes also sometimes an impediment. Nevertheless, we will have a specific session in the second round where we talk about how religion plays a role in this whole issue. And now, without further ado, I would invite Alexa, my co-moderator, to take us through the next. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Dinesh. So before I invite our first round of panelists to speak, we want to hear from you, the participants, from your perspective, where you are in the world. Which WCC region are you coming from? If you could just fill out this poll. And then the second question is menstruation stigmatized in your region? Simply let us know. Is it yes or is it no? And participate in this way through the poll, and at the end we will look at these results and just see where you're coming from and what the state of menstrual equity is in your region. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker for the webinar. Anette Torjusen works with Norwegian Church Aid. She is the global communication coordinator with Norwegian Church Aid and has been documenting water sanitation and hygiene for many years. And she is creating visibility connected to solutions and needs. And so now we will hear from her about what that looks like in the context of menstrual health. Anette?
Thank you so much, Alexa, and thank you all for joining today. I am one of the lucky ones, I used to say, because we talk about how to prevent, we talk about how to facilitate, we talk about how we can change things on the ground, and I'm one of the lucky ones to come and document it and see what kind of door openers working with religious churches and leaders can do. And I will I will present you to some of the girls I've been meeting in the field. First of all, I would just say that NCA we are working a lot with water, and a huge part of that is making a period with dignity. So I have some pictures. Maybe you can. Yes, here it is, and here you have Alesha. She's from the first one you will see is from Ethiopia, but we can go to the next page and we can meet Deodata. We are now in Mbulu in Tanzania. We are visiting a school where girls were not able to go to school because of not having water and sanitation at the school. But after providing with a well and 3,000 people getting the well, sharing the well and water at the school, water pumps all over the villages, they could go back to school. And Deodata, she's one of the girls that we met. And of course, working with religious leaders in this area made it possible to raise awareness on how to prevent the girls from not going to school because of their menstruation. Take next. And here you will see more of the girls, and we can go to the next page as well. And here we have Mary. She is in South Sudan. Because what we will see, and you will also probably hear a lot about it now on Gaza, that being able to have sanitary pads in areas of conflict and war, it's very, very difficult to buy sanitary pads, for example. So one of the huge things NCA are doing is providing girls with the skills to sew their own sanitary pads in this area, because that's kind of, just sewing the sanitary pads is one angle, but they are actually doing they have different purposes on getting this training on sewing, because in South Sudan there is a huge inflation and no girls have almost afford to buy sanitary pads. So this is in the conflict area. They are suing to just get their own sanitary pad because it's too expensive. We can take the next slide. And here is another angle into sanitary pads. This is Alefa. We now travel to Malawi. We are in an area where a lot of girls are also victims of gender-based violence, and And one of the things that's important to the sewing is getting women out of poverty. And so sewing sanitary pads is not only to preventing bleeding through all kind of material that we heard about earlier today, but also getting an income and making people being capable of taking care of themselves and their family. Okay, we can go to next. And here we are also in South Sudan, just an example of the sewing, and we can go next to the next. Okay, so what about working with religious leaders? As I said, is a door opener almost everywhere we go, because when they don't listen to us, they will for sure listen to the priest. And here, one of the stories that we hear all the time is girls being bullied at school. Boys are making fun of them because of the bleeding through the skirts and everything. So one huge important thing is also to make boys talk about period. How should they address girls having the period? How should boys be a huge part of bringing girls back to school, not being home, like Kenneth said before us here, like a father, like a teacher, like a brother. They should all be supportive. So working with boys is so important, and also listening to the priest, talking to the boys, saying how important it is to support the woman, the wife, the sister is a huge part of the importance on the ground. Okay, next. And of course, working with really here you will see Bernarda. We are now in Guatemala, and she's a sister and a director for the Caritas. And you know, among the indigenous people, there are also a lot of taboos connected to this, and it's all connected to water, through how to address these issues, all from getting an income, having vegetables, how to talk about these issues, how to raise awareness about these issues, and also making it easier for indigenous people to speak freely about how these topics is so important to. So this is the Catholic Church, of course. She's really engaging, and she was talking very freely about everything here. Okay, next. Yeah, just also a picture from Guatemala. And next. Okay, so what I will say before my time is running up now is also the power of working interreligious, interfaith. How we can work together, because this is what's giving huge results. I just was in Ethiopia now, and you saw how our Muslim partners were reaching out to our Orthodox right holders, and the other way around. So this is working interface is also a huge important way of addressing these issues. So I think that was my time. It was up now. So I hope you got inspired meeting these people and these girls and women, how they are addressing the period with dignity.
Thank you so much, Annette. Thank you for pointing out the importance of men and boys in this subject, and also for bringing up the interreligious component as well. Dinesh, will you introduce our next speaker?
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much. Our next speaker is Patricia Mulongo, and she represents the EDAN network, that is the Ecumenical Disability Advocacy Network. And Patricia is a menstrual health management champion for people with disabilities. And she's also the founder of Deaf Women Employment, a Kenyan community-based organization. And she will use sign language to put her presentation across. And we have an interpreter, as you can see in the screen, who would help interpreting the sign language. So Patricia, you could, in your summary, say what are the menstrual health challenges that are unique to women living with disability in your context? You have about 5-6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Patricia Mulongo, and I live here in Kenya, Nairobi. And I have founded a group, Deaf Women Empowerment, where I work in trying to help empower women with different health conditions. So for me, I advocate for good menstrual hygiene for women with disabilities. EDAN chose me in 2016 for a training in Kenya about WASH workshop in 2016. When I went there, I learned about menstrual health and cleanliness and management. We really learned a lot. So when I got that empowerment, I felt that people who have disabilities, they do not have access to this information. Hearing people, they can get this information, but for women who have disabilities, they're really left behind all the time. So I started trying to get opportunity to empower these women, to advocate, to teach them about menstrual hygiene. Why? Because sometimes even their family do not even tell them about menstrual hygiene. They think that it's a taboo, like even for someone who has a disability to have menstruation. For example, like deaf children, they do not even know about menstrual health hygiene. So I thought that these are very big challenge. Even when they grow up, they start feeling ashamed. They can't go to school because they feel that other children are going to avoid them when they're having their menstrual cycle. So that has become a very big challenge for women who have disabilities. Again, for women who have disabilities, they miss a lot of information. So even when they are being raised and they're becoming teenagers, they do not have all this information about menstrual hygiene. So even when they start menstruation, they become silent. They do not even talk about it or share with anyone. And also about accessibility, it's really a problem. Many women with disabilities, sometimes they do not even have access to pads. They even use like old bed sheets, old clothes, or old blankets, because some come from poor families. So that's a very big problem. And that blocks them. Even sometimes they cannot even go to school, because when they do not have a pad, they feel like they are not comfortable and confident. Again, there's another big problem with women who have disabilities. When they have their menstruation, example in public toilets, or maybe in the office toilets, sometimes they cannot even, people who have disabilities, they cannot access the toilets. They're not disability friendly. Because, for example, someone who has a wheelchair, they need a ramp for them to access them going to the washrooms. So now, can you imagine a woman who has a disability who is using a wheelchair? How do you expect her to go to a public toilet? And many people, for example, they use that toilet which they do not leave it clean. And for someone who has a disability, like using a wheelchair, must sit down so that they must so that they access the washroom. So for women who have disabilities, they do not even have a support in accessing these things. For example, someone will have to wait for someone to come and help them to access these public toilets. And she feels that's a very big burden because and ashamed because she has to be carried, taken to the toilet, help her to clean herself. So it's very bad that they do not even think about people who have disabilities when making these facilities. Women with disabilities. So accessing the toilets, it's a very big problem to them. Because I think we should have a separate toilet for people who have disabilities. Because they can feel comfortable and not feel excluded. But the society does not remember them. When they're building toilets, they're building boiling, they do not even think about women who have disabilities. So again, when a woman who has a disability is having a menstruation, and for example, she's using a wheelchair, even getting a place to dispose their pad is a problem. She cannot be able to use the taps to wash their hands because the washrooms are not accessible. Sometimes you even see that people who have a disability, they have to crawl when accessing these toilets, which is not hygienic. So I think when we are building these places, we should remember people who have disabilities and having accessibility, which is very important. I think we can work better to make the society to uplift the lives of people who have disabilities, so that they feel that they are equal and they are not oppressed with other people. So as a church, I think you can work with us, as also we are also God's children and people. God made us equally and he loves us equally. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss about issues about women with disabilities and how they can be supported.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I do not have a photo, but I believe next time maybe we can have a photo and I demonstrate all those that I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia, and forgetting your name, our interpreter, for so kindly introducing or interpreting what she is trying to tell us. And also at the crux of this whole issue is inclusivity and empathy. And in our planning, we need to be mindful that how a woman with disability is doubly discriminated because they menstruate. I now hand it over to my co-moderator to please also check if our next speaker, Elizabeth, is already in. Over to you.
Elizabeth is here, and so I will introduce our next speaker. Elizabeth is from Nigeria. She works with Association of Positive Youths Living with HIV and AIDS in Nigeria, and she also works with the global network of people living with HIV to end as the End Pediatric AIDS in Children champion. She's also worked with international communities of women living with HIV in the West Africa region and the Association of Women Living with HIV and AIDS in Nigeria as the gender-based violence advocate. So I will now turn it over to Elizabeth to share about the challenges that women with living with HIV face with menstruation.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm really happy to be here. I gave my slide to Gracia. I don't know if she shared it with you. I don't know if you can share the slide on the screen right now. So well, we you know, it's already difficult as a woman menstruating, and then as a woman living with HIV who is menstruating. So we have so many challenges, and ranging from stigma to discrimination, and of course the shaming and all that comes with it. So I'm just going to talk about a few of them. So I don't know if this slide can be up there so I can make use of it, but if not, I'll just go to my I'll just use this one here. So hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we have some of the unique challenges faced by women living with HIV who menstruate as well. And one of them is increased stigma. I already said that with HIV is already a lot of stigma that comes with it. And then with the fact that we are also women who menstruate and living with HIV. So the stigma is doubled up, and we are faced with additional stigma, discrimination, shaming, and all that. And it's not really been easy. And then we have the menstrual hygiene management, which limits at the access to clean water. Here in my country, Nigeria, we go through a lot, and of course the clean water and all is actually a very big problem, because we wait for the government to do everything, and if they don't do these things, we don't have access to them, and that's a very big problem, because there can never be hygiene without clean water and sanitary pads and towels and all that. And this brings me to a part where I would have to talk about some time in my facility, because I'm a peer champion, where this young girl had came up to the facility, and she was all stained up, and I was like, go and get yourself changed, and I had to follow her because she was reluctant, only for me to get to the washroom, and then she didn't have pads. She was making use of rags and pieces of clothes, and that actually was really not hygienic. That could actually be one of the some of the causes of infections and all. And what we do in the facility is, whenever we are able to get funds, we just buy pads and then give to these young girls. And then we have limited access to menstrual products, which I've mentioned. That's the sanitary pad, the toiletries, and all that. And we have women living with HIV who may never have access to these products, because they are in the rural areas inside the communities where we haven't been able to reach. We are really trying with ICW and Ashran and the rest of the organization, but it's something that we cannot really do on our own like that. And then we have painful menstruation, which is one of the things that women go through. Some women go through painful menstruation, and then with this, they need to get medications and the rest of them, which is not accessible to them. And of course, we have mental health concerns with the hormonal changes and all that comes with it. Is always a lot. And of course, because women living with HIV are placed on a treatment, there's a lot that comes with the treatment, actually, before we talk about the hormonal imbalances with menstruation, and also that can also be a very big challenge. And of course, we have inadequate policies and funding. Like I already stated, we do not have enough fundings for this products and all. And because we are not working with the manufacturers, we hardly get them for these girls, and some of them cannot afford, because an average Nigeria earns very little in our works, and before you know it, you're talking about feeding and bills and all that, and then these girls just it goes on and on with them using toilet tissues and rags and pieces of clothes which are not healthy. And we need to come up with policies that protect these women and girls. It has a lot to do with our dignity and of course our self-esteem. When we have these policies put in place to actually protect our rights as women who menstruate, so we can actually stop the shaming and persecute people who are found guilty of these things, the stigma and the discrimination for women living with HIV and women living with HIV who menstruate. And then this brings me to, raising awareness in faith-based communities and organizations. So we have sensitive, we need to come up with sensitive approach to engage with churches and faith-based groups, to actually talk about these things in sensitive manner, respecting their beliefs and of course their values. So we don't, so that in the course of us fighting for ourselves, we don't get to disrupt other people's activities and ways. And then we have strategic partnership. That's the second one. We have strategic partnership, which is a way of us to collaborate with religious leaders and organizations to develop awareness for campaigns. And we also have culturally relevant activities that we should carry out to ensure all messaging and resources are, appropriately put in place. And then we have also breaking taboos and ending stigma. This is a very important part, and multi-stakeholder approach is needed. We need to engage with some stakeholders like schools, healthcare facilities, and healthcare workers, policymakers, and so many others, even religious leaders and community leaders, to address menstrual taboos and stigma very importantly. And then, of course, the education and awareness. We need to implement comprehensive sexuality educations and campaigns in our facilities, in our churches, in our communities, in schools, to be able to increase and improve the knowledge, and then challenge stereotypes and misconceptions about menstruation. And that way we can also correct these things. And of course, we have policy and advocacy. I went for an advocacy visit sometime in NACA office. NACA is a National Agency for the Control of AIDS in Nigeria. So we went for advocacy visit and we talked about these things just to see how we can come up with these products and this sanitary pads and toiletries for the women and girls, especially for the young women, adolescents and young women who really, really needs it. It would be really good if we can, liaise and work with other organizations in faith-based communities and organizations and all, so that we can actually come up with support and help for these young girls. And then promoting good menstrual health practices. Accessibility is very important. Some of these people live in rural areas deep inside the communities where it is very hard for them to access these things. And we believe that with all these approaches and all these efforts, we should be able to come to get to that point where we can assess these things, even though not all of them, but to a very large extent. And then we have affordability. Most of our women cannot afford these things because we have more of the low income earners here, and it is really, really bad already that we have to deal with lots of health issues. And then, of course, we need to start dealing with the cost of pad and cost of toiletries and so many other things. So if the affordability can be considered, we may not really get them free for now because we are not working with the manufacturers of these products already, but we can actually work hand in hand with the other with other organizations, so that we can cut cost of this part to make them more affordable. And of course, mobilizing funding for local actions. We can identify the needs. We can actually carry out our researches, do our findings, go to the community levels, interact with these people, and then be able to get their needs and know what they actually need and know how to actually reach them, how to actually support them as regards the menstrual health and the needs of women living with HIV who menstruate. And then, of course, we need to engage donors. We need to engage donors like maybe Global Fund, PEPFAR, and United Nations, and all these people who have been working hand in hand with us to actually curb this AIDS in 2030. We can actually work with them and see how they can help in supporting us to get the young women this products and items that they need. And then implementing solutions. We need to utilize the secured fund to actually implement sustainable community-driven solutions to address menstrual health and hygiene issues. So if we can actually implement these things, it will be really helpful. And of course, we
Thank
have...
you. Thank
we
you,
have...
Elizabeth.
Okay.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Unfortunately, that is our time for this, but all of these presentations...
The slide is here, so it's something, if it can be shared, everyone will just look at it later. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is a very important perspective to have on these issues. And yes, the slides will be available after the webinar. Dinesh, do you want to?
Yeah. Okay. Friends, we did a poll in the beginning of the webinar, and maybe it's time to just see the polls. I don't know, Walter, if there is a way to share this to the participants, but the poll results shows that the first question was which region of the World Council of Churches that you represent, and the majority of you present here, about 44% are from Africa, and about 33% are in Asia, understandably very low, about 2% in Caribbean, and 12% in Europe, 2% in Latin America, etc. North America, we have 7% participating in this. And the second question was, is menstruation stigmatized in your region? Is menstruation stigmatized in your region? And obviously, majority of you, about 84% have said yes. And quite encouragingly, about 16% said no. It's not stigmatized in your region. So we're looking forward to that day when 100% would say menstruation is not stigmatized in our region. So we'll now stop sharing. Thank you. And now I turn over to Walter to show us some videos.
Menstruation is still a taboo in our country. Yes. Don't you think like there's a mix, like in some parts of our country, you really, I mean, you're celebrating, you know, menstruation, whereas in some places women are ostracized because they are menstruating?
Yes, of course. I come from Kerala, and I remember in my ancestral home, there was a separate room for the women who would be having their periods, and the food used to be tossed like that to them, you know. And from there now, my family has moved and how. So, you know, I think there is a generational shift. Yes, talking about it, discussing, and schools, I think, have a very important role to play, where the teachers have a very important role to play. And I think they need to kind of pitch in much, much more.
Thank you so much, Geeta. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Selon l'Agence française de développement, une femme passe 2280 jours à voir ses règles.
Men must cultivate the power to be more proactive on women's welfare issues.
Su fekkee da nga am sa règle, tu as honte de le parler, même si soo ko waxee sax, nga ne sama biir day metti, je ressens des douleurs, des courbatures. Dañ naan la demal nga toog parce que ça arrive à toutes les femmes. Parlant des règles, nécessairement, faudra qu'on parle aussi des serviettes qu'on utilise lors de nos périodes menstruelles.
Voilà, finalement, mën nga nekk góor sax dem ba am plus de une trentaine d'années te doo am benn expérience wala connaissance ci lu jigéen ñi dund chaque fin du mois.
buñ si nekkee war nañ leen war a mun taxaw gunge leen accompagner leen ba métier diñ si yëg ñu mun kaa partager ak ñoom ànd ak ñoom si lu bëri. Aujourd'hui, sensibiliser sur l'hygiène des menstruations est important pour informer, sensibiliser et protéger nos jeunes femmes.
te ñun góor ñi dañu ci am wàll dañu war a soutenir suñuy sœur dañu war a soutenir suñuy rakk mais surtout dañu war a soutenir suñu ay femmes.
Il faut savoir que les règles sont un phénomène naturel, normal et propre à chaque femme.
Indeed, the more they are fulfilled with their body and their environment, the more they feel involved, saving just the opportunity and the power to.
Laisser les gens faire ce qu'ils ont à faire Laissez les femmes être ce qu'elles ont envie de devenir. Laissez-nous vivre, laissez-nous briller.
Change and to impact more positively our communities. Today, more than ever, we need the magic to change the world. We are committed.
Okay, thank you so much. This is self-explanatory, these videos for you to internalize and reflect. I request Alexa to take us through the next segment.
Next, we will be discussing how to counter stigma and discrimination through religion, through our religious experiences and practices. And so to start us off with that, Reverend Nicole Ashwood, who is the WCC Program Executive for the Just Community of Women and Men. Here at the WCC, she leads the movements in gender justice. And she will share with us about what, from a Christian perspective, are resources that we have to fight stigmatization and discrimination. Reverend Nikki.
Thank you, Reverend Alexa. Good afternoon, friends. Imagine being in a meeting and needing the loo, but feeling that because everyone is in the room, you can't leave before the speaker is done presenting. But the speaker drones on and on. Then life happens. Your lifeblood gushes to the fore, and your world discovers your current reality. How do you respond? Access is not only about available resources and products. It is also about being able to make the necessary hygiene breaks and decisions to affect and address one's bodily needs. Recently, in a conversation about this webinar with my colleague, Dr. Masiwa Gunda, he said that in the eyes of many congregants, that which comes from the pulpit is what is seen as important. So for menstruation, if it's not preached about from the pulpit, then the congregants understand that menstruation is not important. In that regard, one could argue that until we as religious leaders and religious practitioners begin to take the conversation in our faith spaces as we are doing now, menstruation will continue to be stigmatized and a taboo. One might argue that the World Council of Churches is not a pulpit, and you'd be correct, it is not. But as a fellowship of 352 churches and over 5 million members, I think we have reason to weigh in on this menstruation conversation. In the World Council of Churches, the former Gender Advisory Group offered the gender justice principles, which had guidelines for interaction within our human community. Among the theological considerations, the principles assert gender justice is about whether we are able to incarnate, become the body of God's will for the human community with all the abilities that God gives the church. It then invites the churches and ecumenical partners, all of us gathered here, to discern whether our use of scripture and tradition are life-giving and enhancing, liberating and revealing a loving God who calls us to transformative relationships. This, of course, is rooted in our understanding of Christ as fully human and fully divine, and us being made in the image of God. The principles point, therefore, to the teaching, healing, and ministry of Jesus Christ, who empowered women in the public sphere as an initial signpost to what Jesus invites us to do, and by virtue thereof, to address the issue of menstrual normancy. Dr. Mtata spoke earlier about Jesus and the woman with the issue of blood. And within the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there is an unnamed, unknown woman who's plagued with bleeding for over 12 years. We heard about the issue of cleanliness and what that meant within the Levitical social construct of the day. And one could argue that the Levitical construct is the laws of the religious community. And I'm sure that Rabbi is going to share some more about that. So I'm not going to get too much in it. We recognize, though, that the menstrual laws, the Levitical laws, didn't just refer to menstrual laws. It included leprous people, men, women, carcasses, even children, if there are cases of bodily fluid, as happened with the person in the example mentioned previously. When this woman touches Jesus, therefore, we recognize that Jesus was fully divine. And if Jesus was fully divine, my friends, then we presume that Jesus was aware of the woman's story. Yet Jesus brought this very private issue into the public arena. He did not allow her healing to slide unnoticed. Rather, as the gender justice principles speak of making the personal, public, and political, Jesus opted to do the same by interrupting his journey to heal a 12-year-old girl on the cusp of womanhood to address this woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. Accidental? Perhaps not. In so doing, we see Jesus affirming the woman. He moves her from being a non-entity in the margins to the central figure in the narrative, and she moves from being nobody to daughter. The power relations, therefore, as mentioned in the gender justice principles, shifted, and we find that women became part of the conversation because this woman was an agent for her own transformation. If we're to accept menstruation as being unclean and taboo and stigmatized, then we need to look at the Levitical laws that Dr. Mtata and perhaps Rabbi will later mention. I want to take us to this business of leprous persons. In the Jewish tradition, and I'm going not by the Levitical laws, but by Luke 17:11-19, particularly verse 14, and Matthew 8:14, we note that when healed, the leprous person had to go to the church, present themselves, and they had to offer sacrifices. That's what an unclean person had to do. Not so for this unclean woman. Not so for this woman with the issue of blood. Rather, Jesus commended her and said, her faith has made her whole. How do we then, as people of faith, invite others to find wholeness and wellness in community? I believe that is part of what we are gathered here to do. For we recognize that there is need to harness life-affirming principles and actions that contribute to the transformation of social conditions, offering new actions and ensuring gender-just practices. We therefore consider that it is time for us to walk the talk. Our Thursdays in Black ambassador, Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, at the United Church of Christ Assembly in the US years ago, prepared sanitary packs for people on the move during the assembly. The walk matched the talk. I bring to mind again our ally and friend, Masiwa Gunda. He says, let us consider purchasing sanitary products or sanitary packs, display them visibly in our worship spaces, and at the end of the worship or during the offertory, have men collect these for persons who menstruate in their families. It raises the visibility, it ensures that people hear the presence of allyship, and it meets the need in our community. Can we? Thank you.
Thank you for this call, Reverend Nikki. Dinesh, I will now invite you to introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, sure. Friends, we do not very often see women rabbi, at least in the normal setting, and we are very privileged to have Rabbi Talia Kaplan, a young Rabbi, who recently has been ordained to this ministry. She serves as an organizer, educator, chaplain to a multi-generational community in Overland Park, Kansas in the US. She writes about the intersection of disability justice and Jewish laws around menstruation, and participates in interfaith dialogues through institutions like Auburn Seminary and the UN Women. I'll also put a link to her website, and you can find more about her. So Rabbi Talia Kaplan, now please tell us whether in the same segment, whether religion is an enabler or an obstacle, particularly within the Jewish tradition. Over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, especially on behalf of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue through the Jewish Theological Seminary. As was mentioned in my introduction, I'm a pulpit rabbi, and I'm a rabbi in a movement of Judaism that's egalitarian regarding gender and also observant of Jewish law. So I'll begin by sharing a little bit about these Levitical foundations that were referred to, and how those of us who observe a rabbinic Judaism have come to understand some of the aspects of these laws. There are really two key verses in the book of Leviticus that speak to a menstruating person. Leviticus 15:19 talks about menstruation in the context of other bodily fluids like seminal emissions, irregular bleeding. And this is where we get the idea that a woman who is menstruating becomes tameh, which is a Hebrew word that's often translated as impure. But as I'll explain in a minute, I like to translate tameh as ritually unready or unfit or unable to participate in certain rituals. And subsequently, about 3 chapters later, we do encounter this perhaps slightly more contested idea that a man is not supposed to sleep with a menstruating woman. But before I get to how these evolved within a rabbinic context, I want to point out that within the Torah itself, even in this Leviticus context, I would argue, and many before me have argued, that menstruation is treated as a natural bodily function. Yes, being tameh makes it not possible for people, specifically men who have touched these menstruating women, to participate in certain ritual functions regarding the temple, but it is a very natural part of temple life for people to be coming in and out of this state of ritual fitness or purity. And when the rabbis in rabbinic Judaism develop out a more comprehensive system of law, which we refer to as Hilchot Nida, the laws of Nida, this is where we really start to see some of those further steps that lead to some separation when someone is menstruating. So there's an aspect of these laws called harchakot that talks about distancing practice. So if you've heard of people not sleeping in the same bed, that really comes from the rabbinic era. And I want to both acknowledge that there are some challenges to this, and I want to be careful not to paint Jewish approaches to menstruation with too broad of a brush, because even though these rules in the time of the rabbis were heavily shaped by men, even within this era, this long ago context, the rabbis are talking about how the traditions of women at the time and the practices of women at the time, for example, for those of you who are rabbinic law nerds, I will throw out the Chumrah to Rabbi Zera, right? That we are looking at what women are doing. And sometimes the rabbis actually do incorporate those lived practices into their understanding of the laws. And today, in our egalitarian and even in many Orthodox communities, this tendency to defer to what women are doing, I would say, has only become more prominent. I also just want to mention a helpful perspective for me from my colleague and friend, Rabbi Amelia Wolf. She likes to talk about how patriarchy has certainly used Jewish tradition, and I'm sure other religious traditions, to further stigmas about menstruation. But this is how patriarchy operates. It takes existing systems of belief and culture and uses it to advance patriarchal ideology. So this is different than saying that Judaism or other religious traditions inherently stigmatize menstruation. My opinion is that any reading of text and any translation of text is an act of interpretation. So for as long as human beings have been transmitting and discussing scripture, there is some aspect of interpretation that's informed by our cultural context. You know, we know from anthropologists talking about Polynesian society and West African society that the word taboo can actually be morally neutral. It just means something that is set apart in a particular way. And it's Mary Douglas, a theologian and academic, who famously talks about how cultural and social taboos themselves play a role in defining what's considered pure or impure, acceptable or even dangerous and unacceptable in the first place. And when we come to have these binaries with emotional valences like dirty or unclean, I really think these are very closely intertwined with a Western philosophy that has binaries with very strong moral valences. Nida will always be related to an altered ritual state and separation. There is always going to be that aspect fundamentally within how we talk about these things, but the ways in which we talk about them continues to be context specific. So I want to conclude by speaking a little bit about the work that I've done and the work that my communities have done. There's really been a resurgence in the 21st century of an interest in Nida in liberal and some Orthodox Jewish spaces. We see a seminary called Maharat in the open Orthodox world ordaining women. In the conservative movement and people in other movements and non-denominational spaces, both women who are ordained and not ordained are really passionately engaging in this area of discourse. And we also see queer individuals, including trans individuals, building out the literature around menstruating people who do not have the normative female experience that might be referred to in our biblical texts. So when I talk about disability justice in my work, I'm speaking about one particular area of disability, and it's such a pleasure to be in a space where there are multiple aspects of disability discussed, so we don't have to treat it as a monolith. Professor Kara Jones and many others talk about a feminist approach to disability, including invisible illnesses. And that includes chronic pain and conditions such as endometriosis. So my work really focuses on these pelvic health conditions like endometriosis, vulvodynia, and so on. And the reality is that 1 in 4 people who menstruate also experience some aspect of pelvic pain or vulvovaginal health issues. And by extension, this means that 1 in 4 people experiencing period poverty, in addition to all the challenges that have been discussed, have to navigate these additional medical issues. And so the work that I've done really tries to bring a disability justice lens to help Jewish law as it is transmitted in an ongoing manner and shaped by these people who I've mentioned, that it will take into account disability considerations from the outset rather than in private individual cases. I also just want to say that I'm very proud of my congregants who are serving both within and beyond the Jewish community, collecting menstrual products in ways that have been discussed by other faith communities on this call. In conclusion, I just want to bless us with the ability to acknowledge that there are real pain points in our text, whether we read those pain points because of broader context or because of how we just have come to talk about the texts. And I also want to bless us to be able to lead following those who are directly impacted as they work to shape our communities to have just approaches to menstruation.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Kaplan. And I think you have tried to unpack some of the laws in the Leviticus laws that relates to menstruation within the Jewish tradition, and also the valuable contribution that you are able to bring in as a young women rabbi in this particular tradition that you referred to. So best wishes for your ministry. And we move on to the next. And the final speaker, I request my co-moderator, Alexa, to introduce.
Thank you, Dinesh. All right, so for our final speaker, we have Miss Roni Shakya is coming to us from Nepal, from the Young Women Lead. at the Young Women Christian Association Nepal, and she is working on sexual and reproductive health and rights with communities, and also working to end period stigma in her context. So she will share next.
Thank you. So, hello and namaste everyone. I am Roni from Nepal. It's lovely to meet you all. First, I would like to thank the World Council of Churches for hosting this panel discussion on menstrual hygiene management on International Menstrual Hygiene Day. I'm truly honored to share my work experience on this platform. Today, I feel so happy and grateful to be panelist representing Nepal. It's amazing to be part of this digital panel where we can connect with many inspired young women from different countries and nations. Let me share a brief context about menstruation and harmful practices related to it. First, the topics of menstruation itself is considered taboo and very sensitive to discuss openly due to stigma attached to it. Open conversation on menstruation is often discouraged and judged. Menstruation is individual and considered impure, and they are forced to stay in cow seeds every month. During menstruation, they are not allowed to eat nutritious food. They are not allowed to see sons. They are not allowed to touch their male family in members. Eating places are separate than usually days. They are kept isolated. In 2005 and then again 2017, the Chaupadi practices has been criminalized, but still there has been practices. I do not have like a exact number, but every year women and girls die while performing Chaupadi in the far off midwestern region of Nepal. Most of them die from suffocations after lighting a fire to keep themselves warm in their windowless hut. Some died from snake bite while sleeping alone in the seat. There are several cases report of sexual assaulted in the seat. There's a bitter reality of Nepal regarding the menstrual hygiene management. Let's talk about my working and engagement with MHM. When I was young, I was curious about the change in my body. When I asked my mothers, she said, you will understand and know everything after married. That response left me speechless and made me even more curious. The curiosity became a turning point in my life. I want to know more about my body and change that I was observing on my body. One day I heard about the Young Women Leadership Program known as Rise Up and participated in a week-long program organized by YWCA of Nepal. Through this program, I learned about sexual reproductive health, right, and change in my body, especially menstruation as a natural process, and all the issues related with it. I also know my right to know all the process and issue related with and those informations about knowing the informations and gain that courage and skills to share my learning to community young women and girls. YWCA gave me the strength and voices to do. So I decided to become a young woman right advocate to ensure that young women know their right and understand what is happening in their bodies. YWCA Nepal and World YWCA provide me with a series of training and opportunity where I further develop my knowledge, skills, leadership. After the training, I work as a community mobilizer for YWCA of Nepal, conducting sessions regarding dignified menstruation hygiene management at the grassroots level. This work helped me reach out more young women and girls in the community. Still, not all Nepali community understand menstruation as a natural process. They still think it's something impure. During my experience, when I raised the voices of young women regarding dignified menstruation hygiene management in the community, I face many challenges in Nepal. Girls are not welcomed as leaders, especially in the context of SRHR and MHM. Many community members tease and bullied us, particularly as the male leaders. They do not easily accept young women as leader due to patriarchal mindset and practicals like a society. Since 2014, I have worked with various women's and young women's group issues related to sexual reproductive health, right, and family planning, safe abortion, contraceptions, menstrual hygiene management. It has not been easy. The community often resisted our effort. Even school teachers, sometimes did not allow to run the program in their schools. I faced bullying, abuse, and negative comment from senior boys while conducting menstruation session. These challenges sometimes made me feel very demotivated and did not want to continue my work. Still, today, young women and girls are following the harmful practices as they cannot say no to their elders, and they do not want to disrespect their elders. This is sad, but with my work, I encourage girls and young women to know their right and support them raise their voices for wrongdoing. So when I receive a fund from Global Youth Mobilizing, I travel community to create the awareness on menstrual hygiene management. And most of the young women have no idea to how to use sanitary napkins proper way. So I was able to conduct dignified menstrual hygiene management session for the young women and girls, and distribute free sanitary napkin undergarment for the young women and girls in my communities. And also they know the process of menstruation and what kind of management they should do during the period. Very surprisingly, a lot of young women had not enough idea and knowledge of how to use sanitary napkin, which was really sad moment. In my working experience, it's memorable because now I am a young woman lead in Nepal. So I express my work experience with young women in the communities to address this issue. We need to start from the grassroots. We must understand the situation of young women within the families, communities, and at the same time the local level. Based on this finding, we should conduct the awareness programs in families and communities. Continue the program related to activists and advocacy should be run, and invest in young women and ensure their active involvement. Thank you. So I just share my work videos and photo. You can share now.
Thank you so much, Roni. Thank you for your perspective and bringing it down to the personal experience. It's very important to highlight that. So now we will just ask for 10 more minutes of your time to engage us with questions and answers and discussion. We're going to open the floor for reactions and any discussion about how menstrual equity and the topics that we discussed today relate to your perspective. Dinesh, do you have anything else to say to open the floor?
Yeah, no, I think there were a couple of comments and questions, not questions, but more comments that are already there. I think one was that how the various, how to sensitize men particularly, because they are at the kind of root of this problem. And yeah, there was also about some of the blind faith or belief that are existing in different parts of the world relates to menstruation, in addition to what Roni has so beautifully also, painfully rather, not beautifully, articulated that she had to go through. Yes, but please feel welcome to raise your hands and ask questions or comment. This time is yours, the next 10 minutes. Okay, Nikki, would you like to read that out from, or maybe better still if Rachel herself can read it?
So Rachel,
what I was trying to say is that menstrual health is not a new phenomenon. It's something which has been done, traditionally for many years, ages, even before we were born. Yeah, and the initiation groups, initiation ceremonies are very key to that. You know, as you grow up, all of the young people go through menstrual hygiene. So I think the critical issue is on how we can deconstruct what the menstrual messages, which are already there at the grassroots, by, you know, looking at the the dangers that the initial teaching brings to the women and the men. I think that's where I think we need to zero in. And secondly, I think you know, work in menstruation is not about me having an organization to do it, because what I see is that there's already a lot which is happening in terms of menstrual hygiene, and I think there is need to quantify what is happening outside the organized, you know, like, okay, I'm Rachel Fidra, Lydia Foundation, I do this and this, but to quantify the efforts which are already there at grassroots level. That's my comment from here in Malawi, from the warm heart of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much raising these hard questions, but the realities of our life. And also there are in the chat, I think Elizabeth also continues to draw the attention. I think one of the speakers was also mentioning, maybe Kenneth was saying, how condoms were freely distributed during the peak of the HIV and AIDS, but why not sanitary pads? And that's, I think, is a challenge. And let's not just look outside. In our own institutions, do we have a box readily available openly for the sanitary hygiene product? It's not only, one is affordability, it's costly, but the other is sometimes accidents happen. Last year during this event, we saw a video how an African political leader, she was shamed and kicked out of the parliament because she was menstruating, even though she did this as a awareness raising. So we need to be prepared and do these proactive steps. So Elizabeth, thank you for bringing that out. Alexa, did you see any more questions?
Yes, there were a few. Someone asked, how can churches help people with disability to fight against stigmatization? Another one was about a specific question about what symptoms and disorders are related to menstruation, and we want to know more about what they're referring to, the person who asked that. And then also someone asking about the WCC's role in period poverty and asking more from us about how the WCC engages and has engaged these.
Nikki, we want to take that out?
Sure. So thank you for these wonderful questions. Time did not permit me to go into all, and I was also trying to not repeat some of what we discussed in previous years. The World Council of Churches is completely against the issue of period poverty. And we have encouraged persons, both through Thursdays in Black and through other programmatic areas, including Ecumenical Water Network, and with the work of the Just Community of Women and Men, Ecumenical Disabilities Advocacy Network, Ecumenical HIV and AIDS Initiatives and Advocacy, and now through our Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights desks, to say there is need for us to be responsible in maintaining the dignity of all humanity. And that includes all God's created people. So we are promoting that in a very practical way. And I did mention that in my presentation, through our Thursdays in Black ambassador and through the Thursdays in Black program, have spoken at length on the issue of period poverty. This was the source of one of our side events, parallel events, sorry, during the recently held Commission on the Status of Women. So we are committed to this, and we encourage our members to do the due diligence. There was another question. How can churches help to address the issue of stigmatization with with people with disability. That one is a little bit more complex in the sense that we need to address it on two levels. We need to address the stigmatization of people with disabilities, but we also need to address the issues related to the stigmatization of menstruation. And our colleagues at EDAN, as seen through our speakers, Patricia, and the question raised by Juliet, have been working assiduously to reduce some of this. We have been doing awareness raising, and we have been working with partners in the field to ensure that awareness is made possible for people with disabilities, and awareness is given about issues related to menstruation and menstrual hygiene. I think I've covered the questions.
Yeah, and there are a couple of questions I think any of the speakers would like to take. One is the reusable pads. We didn't talk about it. If somebody knows about it among the speakers, please feel free to respond. And also there was one other.
The comment from Reverend Alexa that the Human Dignity and Reproductive Health Program is publishing the framework for churches to engage various reproductive health topics, which includes menstrual equity and period poverty. But Rev, speak. Reverend Alexa.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Rabbi,
Go for it, Rabbi.
go ahead.
My bad.
Rabbi, go ahead.
I wanted to, it looks like cap aids, I was understanding cap aids or Raymond mostly correctly, so I'll try to answer that question. When I use the word pelvic health issues, it kind of serves as an umbrella. It can refer to things that do have to do with pregnancy. Oftentimes after pregnancy, there can be organ prolapse or pelvic floor dysfunction. It can also refer to dyspareunia or painful sex. But what many people don't realize is that pelvic health issues extend far beyond physical intimacy, and also things having to do with childbirth. Anyone who has uterus, ovaries, or a vulva, or some combination thereof, could experience pelvic floor dysfunction, endometriosis, which has to do with the uterine lining and lining of other organs. There are also conditions specifically of the vulva. And I know it can be jarring for some people to hear these words coming from a rabbi, and I want to acknowledge that discomfort, but I really think it is important for us as faith leaders and people of faith or faith curious folks to speak about these body parts just as we would talk about, you know, issues with an elbow or a broken nose, because they are health issues at the end of the day. So I appreciate people's openness to me sharing that and the curiosity. And I want to say, you know, this is not something that I learned either in sex ed or when I was taught about different health issues. It's not that because I'm in America, I learned certain things. There really is a lot of work to be done. And so thank you for being so open to doing that work.
Thank you, Rabbi Kaplan. Yeah, I think, friends, time has run out. Actually, the 10 minutes we sought your permission for is also now over. I wish we had a little more time for a closing round of comments from each speaker, but that would not be available. But we will, we have all of your contact details. We will send you all the presentations that were made, also a summary of this webinar, as well as the edited recording of this webinar would be shared with all the participants. Then you are free to also share. But I think the takeaway, what also from my point, and then maybe I'll ask Alexa to chime in also, is that yes, culture, religion, somehow in many contexts sanction these taboos and discriminations, and at the root of this is the patriarchy, which then somehow uses these as a tool to keep women getting more productively and dignified manner engaged in the social, political, and institutional leadership roles. That also is very much a point of concern. And the other aspect we have been trying to also bring in how WASH plays a role in empowering women to lead a dignified life and not experience period poverty. And World Council of Churches and its partners that I mentioned, who are behind organizing this, would continue to raise these issues in the coming months and years. and until period or menstruation becomes a normal fact of life, which shouldn't be too long. At least we are seeing by 2030 when the SDG goals are due. Alexa, any last words and wrap it up?
Dinesh, thank you all of you for joining us. And yes, I think there's a lot of energy around discussing more and doing more in the areas and intersections of sexual health and menstrual health, reproductive health. All of these things are very interrelated. And Dinesh, I think you summarized it well with we need every kind of sector of society to engage and work together. So I put contact information in the chat if you would like to get in touch with us at the WCC or our speakers. You can email us. Otherwise, thank you all for joining us, and blessings on the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks to all the speakers and participants. Have a good day, evening, morning, wherever you are. Thank you all.